Every morning, she served food from a broken cart on a dusty roadside, and every morning, a small homeless boy stood silently nearby, watching others eat. She never asked his name, never asked his past, she only fed him with love. But one ordinary day, the street froze in shock when four black luxury SUVs pulled up in front of her humble stall, and her quiet kindness was about to change her life forever. The sun had barely climbed above the tangled electric wires when Shanta pushed her food cart to the same spot she had used for nearly 15 years. The wheels creaked as always, protesting the weight of the metal pots, the gas cylinder, and the small wooden box that held her spices. This corner of the road was nothing special, just a patch of cracked pavement near a bus stop, surrounded by noise, dust, and the restless movement of a city. But to Shanta, it was everything. It was how she survived. It was how she fed herself. And after her husband's death, it was how she learned to live alone. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the edge of her sari and began her routine. Rice washed. Lentils stirred. Flatbread dough kneaded with hands hardened by years of labor. The smell of warm food slowly drifted into the air, mixing with the scent of petrol and damp earth. Office workers, rickshaw drivers, and laborers would soon arrive, hungry and impatient, ready to eat quickly before the day swallowed them whole. That was when she noticed him again. He stood a few steps away from her stall, as he did every day, barefoot.
Thin.
His clothes were too big for his small frame, torn at the sleeves, and faded beyond any original color. His hair fell messily over his eyes, but they were what always caught Shanta's attention, dark, quiet, and filled with a hunger that went far deeper than food. He never begged, never spoke, never stepped too close. He only watched. Shanta had noticed the boy weeks ago. At first, she assumed he would move on like the others. Street children came and went, faces changing with the seasons. But this boy stayed. Every morning, same place, same silence. He watched customers eat, his stomach tightening as he swallowed his own hunger. Sometimes he would look away quickly if their eyes met, as if ashamed of wanting something he knew he couldn't have. The first time she fed him, it wasn't planned. A customer had left half his meal untouched, complaining it was too spicy. Shanta wrapped the food and turned, intending to give it to a stray dog that often slept nearby. That's when she saw the boy, standing closer than usual, his eyes fixed on the packet in her hand. Something in her chest softened. "Come," she said gently, motioning him forward. The boy froze. He shook his head. "It's okay," she said again, lowering her voice. "Take it." He hesitated, then stepped forward slowly, like a frightened animal expecting to be chased away. When she placed the food in his hands, his fingers trembled. He didn't say thank you. He didn't smile. He just clutched the packet as if it might disappear, and ran. Shanta watched him go, her heart strangely heavy. The next morning, she made an extra portion. She didn't call him. She didn't announce it. When the boy appeared at his usual spot, she quietly placed a plate on the corner of her cart and stepped back. After a long moment, he approached, sat on the curb, and ate with careful, deliberate bites, as if trying to make the food last forever. From that day on, it became a routine. Every morning, one extra meal. Warm rice. Lentils. Sometimes bread. Sometimes vegetables. She never asked his name. Never asked where he slept or where his parents were. She had learned long ago that some wounds were too deep for questions. But as days passed, she noticed things. The boy was polite in his own way. He always waited until she nodded before touching the food. He never wasted a single grain. And when he finished, he would clean the plate carefully with his fingers and place it back on the cart, his movements neat and almost trained.
Trained.
That word lingered in her mind. He didn't behave like most street children. He didn't fight, didn't steal, didn't shout or laugh loudly. He carried himself with a strange, quiet dignity, as if he remembered a different life and was trying not to forget it. One morning, as rain threatened the sky, Shanta noticed bruises on his arm. "What happened?" she asked softly. The boy flinched. "Nothing," he said quickly. It was the first time she had heard his voice. It was clear educated and controlled, nothing like the rough tones of children raised on the streets. Shanta said nothing more. She simply placed the plate in front of him and added an extra piece of bread. Over the weeks, customers began to notice. "Why do you feed him every day?" one man asked while chewing loudly. "He'll just bring more like him." Shanta shrugged. "A hungry stomach doesn't need permission." Another woman whispered, "Be careful. You never know who these children are." Shanta only smiled and continued serving food. What she didn't know was that from a distance, unseen by her or anyone else, someone was always watching the boy. Every afternoon, once the boy finished eating and disappeared into the maze of alleys behind the market, a black car would pass slowly through the area. The windows were tinted, the engine silent and powerful. Inside sat men in suits, eyes scanning the streets with sharp attention. "Still here," one of them muttered into a phone. "The woman feeds him every morning." "Do nothing," came the voice on the other end. "Just observe." Back at her stall, Shanta closed for the day as she always did. She packed her pots, wiped her cart, and counted the small amount of money she had earned. It was never much, but it was enough. Enough to survive. Enough to give one meal to a boy who had no one. That night, as the city slept, the boy lay curled beneath a torn plastic sheet near an abandoned building. He stared at the stars through gaps in the roof, clutching the memory of warm food and gentle hands. His stomach was full, but his heart was heavy with a secret he had carried for far too long.
He was not just a homeless child.
And the woman who fed him had no idea that her kindness was slowly pulling him back toward a world he had been forced to escape. A world that was already moving closer to her humble roadside stall. The next morning began like any other, but the air carried a strange tension, as if the street itself was holding its breath. Shanta arrived early, earlier than usual, because sleep had escaped her. The image of the boy's bruised arm and the sound of his calm, careful voice had followed her into the night. She had dreamed of her own son, the one she lost years ago to a fever she couldn't afford to treat in time. In her dream, he stood just like the boy, thin, silent, watching her from a distance. She shook the thought away and focused on her work. As the gas stove hissed to life and the pot began to warm, she glanced instinctively toward the corner where the boy usually stood. He wasn't there yet. For a brief moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Had something happened? Had he moved on? Been chased away? Her hands slowed as she stirred the lentils. Then she saw him. He emerged from between two closed shops, walking carefully, as if his body ached. His steps were slower than usual, and there was a faint limp in his left leg. When he reached his usual spot, he stopped and waited, eyes lowered. "You're late today," Shanta said gently, surprising herself with how natural it felt to speak to him now. "I had to go somewhere," he replied. She noticed his voice sounded tired, older than it should have. She placed the plate in front of him and, without saying a word, poured a little extra gravy over the rice. The boy looked up at her, startled, then nodded slightly in gratitude before sitting down. As he ate, Shanta observed him more closely. There were new marks on his hands, scratches, as if he had climbed over something rough. His knuckles were red raw. This was not the damage of careless play. It looked like survival. "Where do you sleep?" she asked quietly. He paused, his fingers hovering over the food. "Different places," he said after a moment. "Wherever it's safe." Shanta swallowed. And safe is not always easy to find, is it? He shook his head, still not meeting her eyes. Customers came and went, coins clinking, plates scraping. Life continued loudly around them, unaware of the fragile conversation unfolding at the edge of the road. Shanta wanted to ask more. She wanted to know his name, his story, the weight behind his silence. But something told her not to push. Kindness, she knew, was not always about questions. Sometimes it was simply about presence. Across the street, a man stood pretending to scroll on his phone. His eyes, however, were fixed on the boy. He spoke softly into a hidden earpiece.
He's eating.
Same woman. No change. Good, came the reply. Stay back. The boy finished his meal and cleaned the plate, as always. Before returning it, he hesitated. Why do you do this? He asked suddenly. Shanta looked at him, surprised. Do what? Feed me. Every day. She thought for a moment. Then she smiled. Because you're hungry. That's not the reason, he said quietly. Her smile faded. What do you mean? People don't do things without a reason, he said. They always want something. Shanta leaned on her cart and met his eyes fully for the first time. Then maybe, she said softly, this world hasn't been kind enough to you yet. He looked away, blinking rapidly, as if her words had struck something fragile inside him. That afternoon, rain finally fell. Heavy, relentless, turning dust into mud and streets into shallow rivers. Shanta closed her stall early, worried about the boy. She scanned the road anxiously, but he was gone. Hours later, as darkness crept in, the boy ran. Water soaked his clothes as he darted through alleys, heart pounding. Behind him, voices echoed, angry, sharp, dangerous. He slipped, scraped his knee, and bit back a cry. He couldn't be caught. Not again. He ducked into an abandoned warehouse, breath ragged, and pressed himself against a wall. Memories flooded him without mercy. Polished floors, heavy doors, men in suits shouting, his mother's scream, his father's blood on white marble. He squeezed his eyes shut. No, he whispered to himself. Not again. Outside, the black car rolled slowly past, its headlights cutting through the rain like knives. Inside, a man frowned.
He's running, he said.
Something spooked him. Let him run. The voice replied calmly. He won't go far. He always comes back. And he did. The next morning, Shanta found him sitting on the curb before she even arrived. He looked smaller somehow, curled inward, his confidence cracked. When she approached, he stood up quickly, as if expecting to be chased away. You're early today, she said gently. He nodded. I didn't want to miss breakfast. She didn't comment on the tear in his shirt or the fresh cut above his eyebrow. She simply handed him the plate and watched as he ate, slower than usual, lost in thought. Did someone hurt you? She asked quietly. He shook his head.
No.
I just remembered things. Shanta sat down beside him, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by. Memories can hurt more than fists, she said. I know. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Did you lose someone? He asked. She nodded. My son. He was about your age. I'm sorry, he said, his voice sincere. So am I, she replied. For a moment, the world felt smaller. Two wounded souls sitting on a broken curb, sharing silence that spoke louder than words. What's your name? Shanta asked. He hesitated. Saying it felt dangerous. Names carried power. Names could be traced. But something in her eyes made him trust her. Ariv, he said softly. She repeated it like a prayer. Ariv. He smiled faintly. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. From across the street, the man in the suit stiffened. He immediately raised his phone. She knows his name now. There was a pause on the line. Then it's time, the voice finally said. Prepare the vehicles. Back at the stall, Shanta packed an extra portion of food into a small cloth. For later, she said, handing it to Ariv. He looked at the bundle, then at her. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. Neither of them noticed the quiet shift in the street. The subtle way people slowed down, sensing something unseen approaching. The distant hum of powerful engines moving closer, like fate rolling forward on black wheels. Shanta watched Ariv disappear into the crowd, unaware that the simple act of learning his name had just placed her at the center of a storm she could never have imagined. The day the street fell silent began like any other, with noise and chaos layered over one another in familiar disorder. Vendors shouted prices, buses groaned as they stopped and started, and the air smelled of frying oil and dust. Shanta reached her usual spot and pushed her cart into place, nodding to the tea seller across the road. She had no idea that before the sun reached its highest point, her small corner of the city would become the center of something extraordinary. She prepared the food as always, but her eyes kept drifting toward the alley where Arav usually appeared from. He was late again. Not terribly late, but enough to make her worry. She told herself not to panic. Children on the streets learned to survive unpredictability. Still, she made his portion and kept it warm. When he finally arrived, something was different. Arav walked with his head held a little higher, his steps more deliberate. His clothes were the same, worn and faded, but his eyes carried a seriousness that unsettled her. He didn't go straight to his usual spot. Instead, he stood in front of her cart. "Good morning," he said politely. Shanta smiled. "Good morning. Sit, I'll bring your food." He hesitated. "Can I help you first?" She laughed softly. "Help me?" "Yes," he said, already reaching for a stack of plates. "You work alone. It's not fair." She watched him arrange the plates carefully, the way he aligned them neat and straight. Again, that sense of training returned, nagging at her mind. Street life didn't teach children to move like this. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. He shrugged. "From before." Before what? Before he could answer, customers began arriving, and the moment passed. Arav moved aside, waiting patiently as Shanta served people. Some noticed him helping and frowned, others smiled. One man muttered, "At least he's useful now." Shanta shot him a sharp look. "He was always useful," she said firmly. The man scoffed but said nothing more. Across the road, a different kind of movement drew attention. Traffic slowed. Conversations faltered. A low, unfamiliar hum cut through the usual noise, deep and powerful. Shanta looked up just as the first black SUV appeared at the end of the street. Then another, and another, and a fourth. They moved in perfect formation, sleek and polished, their dark windows reflecting the stunned faces of the crowd. The street began to quiet, as if the city itself sensed that something important had arrived. People stepped back. Vendors stopped shouting. Even the buses seemed to pause. The SUVs pulled up directly in front of Shanta's humble stall. Engines shut off one by one. Silence. Shanta's heart pounded. Her first thought was fear. Had she done something wrong? Was her stall illegally placed? She wiped her hands on her sari, suddenly very aware of how small and exposed she felt. Arav stood frozen beside her. The doors of the first SUV opened. A man stepped out, tall and imposing, dressed in an expensive black suit. His hair was neatly combed, his expression unreadable. Then another man emerged and another. They moved with purpose, scanning the area, forming a subtle barrier between the stall and the crowd. People whispered, "Who are they? Is a politician coming?" "No, these are private vehicles." The man in the suit approached Shanta. "Are you the woman who runs this food stall?" he asked. Her throat felt dry. "Yes." "You feed a boy here every morning," he continued, his gaze sharp. Her heart dropped. She instinctively placed a hand in front of Arav. "If he has done something..." "He has done nothing wrong," the man said calmly. "And neither have you." Arav's hands clenched at his sides. His face had gone pale. The man turned to him. "Arav," he said. The sound of his name spoken so confidently sent a ripple of shock through Shanta. "Yes," Arav replied, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "It's time," the man said. "No," Arav whispered.
Please.
Not here. Shanta looked between them, confusion and panic rising. What is this about? Who are you people? The man sighed, his expression softening slightly as he looked at her. Madam, you have shown extraordinary kindness to this child. A kindness that has not gone unnoticed. He gestured toward the SUVs. Arav is not a homeless boy by fate, he continued. He is the sole heir to the Malhotra group. The name hit the crowd like thunder.
People gasped.
Someone dropped a plate. The Malhotra group was known across the country: real estate, technology, hospitals, media. A business empire worth billions. Shanta's knees felt weak. That's impossible, she whispered. Arav lowered his head. I didn't want you to know like this. The man continued. 2 years ago, Arav's parents were killed in an internal power struggle within the company. For his safety, he was hidden, but the people meant to protect him failed. Shanta's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the boy she had fed every day, the boy who had eaten on the curb beside her. He ran, the man said. He survived on the streets to avoid being found. We have been searching for him ever since. Arav finally looked at Shanta. His eyes were wet. You didn't treat me like a name, he said softly. Or money. You treated me like a person. She reached out without thinking and pulled him into her arms. The crowd watched in stunned silence as a poor food seller hugged a billionaire heir like her own child. You are my child, she said fiercely. No matter who you are. The man cleared his throat. We must take him now. It's not safe. Arav pulled back, panic rising. Will I ever see her again? The man looked at Shanta. That depends on you, madam. Shanta lifted her chin. Then I will see him again. The man nodded slowly.
Yes.
You will. As Arav was guided toward the SUV, he turned back again and again, his eyes searching for her. Shanta stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face, clutching the edge of her cart as the vehicles prepared to leave. The engine started. And just like that, the street that had witnessed quiet kindness for months became the place where destiny revealed itself. The street did not return to normal after the SUVs left. Even hours later, people stood near Shanta's stall in small clusters, whispering, replaying the moment again and again as if saying it aloud might make it more believable. Some looked at her with awe, others with suspicion, and a few with regret, wondering how many hungry children they themselves had ignored. Shanta, however, heard none of it. She sat on a low stool beside her cart, staring at the empty space where Arav used to sit. The plate she had set aside for him that morning remained untouched, the food now cold. Her hands trembled as she packed it away. For the first time in years, she closed her stall early. That night, sleep refused to come. The room felt too quiet, too large without the familiar rhythm of a routine. She lay on her thin mattress, replaying every memory, his careful eating, his soft voice, the way he cleaned the plate as if he respected the food more than anything else. Now she understood. Hunger had taught him humility, but his past had taught him discipline. Is he safe? She whispered into the darkness. Miles away, Arav sat in the back seat of the SUV, wrapped in a warm blanket, staring out at the city, lights rushing past. The car was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. Men sat around him, alert, watchful. For the first time in 2 years, he was surrounded by protection, but his chest ached. She will worry, he said suddenly. The man beside him glanced over. She will be informed. That's not enough, Arav replied. She needs to know I'm okay. The man nodded. I'll make sure she does. The gates of the Malhotra estate opened slowly, revealing manicured gardens, fountains, and a mansion that glowed softly under golden lights. Arav felt a wave of dizziness. This place was once his home. Now it felt foreign, almost unreal. Inside, doctors examined him, servants hovered, and lawyers whispered in corners. Everyone wanted something from him: his signature, his presence, his confirmation. But all he wanted was to sit on a curb and eat warm food with a woman who never asked him for anything. Back on the street, the days grew heavy for Shanta. Customers increased, curious to see the woman who fed the billionaire's son. Some came out of admiration, others out of greed, hoping proximity might bring fortune. A few even suggested she raise her prices. She refused. "This cart fed me before," she said quietly. "It will feed me now." But the mornings felt wrong. She still made an extra portion out of habit, only to realize there was no one to give it to. One day, she finally broke down and placed the food near the alley where Arav used to appear. "Maybe another child will need it," she told herself. 2 weeks later, a white envelope appeared on her cart. No stamp, no address. Inside was a simple letter written in careful handwriting. "Ani, I am safe. I eat 3 times a day now, but none of the food tastes like yours. I think of you every morning. Please don't stop feeding others. You saved me when I was lost. Arav." Shanta pressed the letter to her chest and cried openly, not caring who saw. From that day on, change came slowly but unmistakably. Officials visited her stall, polite and respectful. Her cart was inspected, then replaced with a stronger one. A clean water connection appeared nearby. When she tried to refuse, a young officer smiled and said, "Arav insisted." Then one morning, a car arrived, not black, not intimidating, but simple and white. A woman stepped out, elegantly dressed, her eyes kind but filled with sorrow. "I am Arav's aunt," she said. "He talks about you every day."
Shanta didn't know what to say.
"You gave him back his faith in people," the woman continued. "He wants you to come and see him." Shanta shook her head. "This is my life. My stall. I can't leave." The woman smiled. "Then let him come to you." A week later, the street filled again, not with fear this time, but anticipation. A single car arrived. Arav stepped out, cleaner, healthier, but with the same eyes. He ran to her without hesitation. Shanta held him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. "You've grown," she said through tears. "And you're still the same," he replied, smiling. They sat together on the curb, sharing food like old times. Cameras flashed from a distance, but neither of them noticed. From that day on, Arav came often, not as an heir, not as a symbol, but as a boy who had once been hungry, and a woman who had once fed him without knowing why. And the city began to understand that sometimes the greatest wealth is not inherited, but given freely, one warm meal at a time. The street had changed, but it was still the same street. The dust still rose when buses stopped too hard. The tea sellers still shouted at dawn. Shanta's cart still stood on the cracked pavement, its paint chipped, its corners worn smooth by years of use. Yet something invisible had settled into the air, something softer, kinder, as if the road itself remembered what had happened there. Arav kept his promise. He came not with convoys, not with guards crowding the space, but quietly, often early in the morning when the city was still stretching awake. Sometimes he wore simple clothes, sometimes school uniforms, sometimes he came straight from meetings his guardians insisted he attend. But whenever he sat on the curb beside Shanta, he became the same boy again, the one who ate slowly, respectfully, gratefully. People watched from a distance. Some bowed their heads in respect. Others felt shame burn behind their eyes. A few parents nudged their children and whispered lessons they wished they had learned sooner. Shanta never treated Arav differently. She scolded him when he didn't finish his vegetables. She wrapped extra food for him, even though she knew he would return to a house with chefs and servants. And when he complained about tutors or responsibilities, she listened patiently, stirring lentils as if his worries were no heavier than steam rising from the pot. "You survived the streets," she told him once. "You will survive boardrooms too." He smiled at that. But destiny was not done testing them. One evening, long after the market had closed, Shanta noticed two men standing near her stall. They weren't customers. Their eyes moved too sharply, scanning, measuring. Instinct, honed by years of vulnerability, told her something was wrong. The next day, Arav didn't come, nor the next. On the third day, a black SUV appeared again, but this time, only one. The man who stepped out looked tired, older than before. There has been a threat, he told Shanta quietly. Someone from the past is trying to reach him. Her heart clenched. Is he safe?
For now, the man said.
But we're moving him abroad temporarily. Shanta nodded slowly, her throat tight. She had always known this world would pull him away again. Still, knowing didn't lessen the pain. That night, Arav came secretly. No cameras. No witnesses. He hugged her longer than before. I don't want to go, he admitted. You must, she said gently. Running once saved you. Now standing strong will. He pressed something into her hand, a small envelope, thicker than paper should be. Open it after I leave, he said. When he was gone, Shanta sat alone beneath a flickering streetlight and opened it. Inside was a legal document. Her stall. The land beneath it. The surrounding block. All transferred to her name. Her hands shook violently. At the bottom was a handwritten note. You gave me food when I had nothing. You gave me dignity when I had no name. This street raised me, but you saved me. Let this place feed many more. Your son always. Shanta cried until dawn. Months passed. The stall became a shelter. Then a kitchen. Then a small foundation. Not flashy. Not advertised. Just a place where no child was ever turned away hungry. Shanta worked harder than ever, refusing luxury, refusing titles. I am just a cook, she said. Let the food speak. Years later, on a national stage filled with light and applause, Arav Malhotra stood before the world. Tall, composed, powerful. Reporters waited for polished speeches about success and resilience. Instead, he told a story. He spoke of a woman who never asked his name, of a plate placed quietly on a cart, of kindness without curiosity, of love without conditions. The cameras cut to Shanta sitting in the audience, her hands folded, her eyes wet. This, Arav said, his voice breaking, is my real inheritance. The crowd stood. And somewhere on a dusty road, a small food stall continued to serve warm meals, proof that the smallest kindness can stop a world and change it forever. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Kindness doesn't need wealth, power, or recognition. Sometimes, it's just a warm meal, a gentle word, or the courage to care when the world looks away. Shanta never knew who the boy was, and that is exactly why her kindness mattered. So, wherever you are, whoever you meet, choose humanity first, because you never know whose destiny your compassion might change. Thank you for listening. If you believe small acts can create big miracles, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More heartfelt stories are coming, stories that remind us all that goodness still lives among us.